Hi everyone, my name is Julian Lopez and my presentation is called Dismantling Stereotypes, the Miracle Worker. I want to start by saying I know Helen Keller was not autistic, but I think the movie shows her shutting herself off from the world, and that reminded me a lot of what I've seen with some of my autistic students. That's why I chose this film, because even though it's not about autism, it made me think about representation, stereotypes in my own teaching. This film tells the story of Helen Keller, who became deaf and blind when she was only 19 months old. And by the time she's 6, she cannot communicate her needs, and often she lashes out in frustration, and her parents don't know how to help her, and they are desperate for answers. And then Anne Sullivan arrives. She takes on what looks like an impossible challenge, which is helping Helen to connect to the world. Annie, who was partially blind herself, uses tough love and persistence to reach Helen. She teaches her by spelling words into her hand, and even when Helen resists, she doesn't want to communicate. She doesn't know to, I think. And there is a turning point that comes at the water pump, which is close to the end of the movie, when Helen realizes the cool water she feels is connected to the letters WATER in her hand. So right after that, Helen goes to Annie and spells the word teacher. And I think that's a powerful moment because in this scene, it shows she not only made a breakthrough with language, but she also recognized Annie's importance in her life and as her guide and as someone she deeply loves and respects. I think in the movie, Helen is shown as almost this uncontrollable until Sullivan comes along. This makes for drama, for great drama, but I also think it plays into the stereotyping part. And then in one of the readings, I found this quote. Laurie Block says, representations of disability often reflect contemporaneous ideas, but those ideas may themselves be affected by the assumptions inherent in popular images. I think, in other words, movies like this tell us more about society's assumptions than about disability itself. This movie also frames Helen's disability as this huge tragedy that only gets better when a non-disabled savior steps in. I think that will be the part where the teacher comes in, and then, according to the movie, she's the only person that is going to be able to save her, quoting this word because that's how they framed it. One of the quotes that I found as well from Hayes and Black says that this is the discourse of pity, and this is where people with disabilities are shown as objects of compassion instead of agents of their own lives. I think that stereotype is still around today, even though this is a movie from the 60s, and I think it really shapes how people think about disability. This movie also makes it seem like progress can only happen through extraordinary effort from one amazing teacher. But I think in real life, success comes from structure, supports, accessible tools, consistency, and more important, collaboration uh, between the parts that are supporting. One of the mm, quotes from the CDE website that I found is structured teaching promotes independence by capitalizing on the visual strengths of people with autism. So it's not just about one person's persistent. I think it's about the systems we put in place. I think as a fifth grade teacher, I will have to admit that I've had my own bias before. I think I've assumed at times that autistic students couldn't communicate, and I think I've learned that this is not true. I think like Helen Keller, every student has a voice, and I just need to learn how to listen. Um, in the book that we're reading right now, one of the quotes I found from Gargiulo and Bauk says individuals with disabilities are more like their typical peers than they are different. So basically, it means that they have more things in common to their peers than they do not. And I think that's something I try to carry with me now. Um, my in my classroom, I've had students who actually started out completely nonverbal, but later they use pictures or they started to use a device or gestures to communicate with me. I think other students were very verbal, but they had trouble socially. So I think every time I've realized that the issue is not whether they can communicate, I think it's whether I'm ready to understand the way they do it. And just like Annie had to learn Helen's way, the teacher in the movie, I think I have to learn my students' ways. Um, for audiences without disabilities, I think this movie might feel really inspiring. But I also think for people with disabilities, it can also feel like they're being boxed into two extremes because it's either way too tragic or miraculous. And so I think it's still putting them into this box of is either way this or that. Longmore, in one of the readings, said disability has been used as a melodramatic device associating disability with helplessness. And that's a danger that these portrayals can affect how society treats people in everyday life. Even though this is a movie from the 60s, I think it's mm, valuable to say that it's still happening. This assignment has really pushed me to reflect on my own assumptions, and it's easy to let movies and media shape how we see disability. Even as teachers, I think, as also Longmore said, the political task is to liberate disabled people from the paternalistic prejudice expressed in media images. I think for me, that means not just challenging stereotypes, but making sure my classroom is a place where students are seen for their strengths and not their limitations. And I'm going to wrap it up with this quote from Laurie Block. It says, the myths of disability still have power today to alter and affect the lives of individuals with disabilities as well as their families. That's exactly why this work matters. I think our job as teachers is to break those myths down and make sure every student's voice is valued. Thank you.